the pro and con of working in the nonprofit sector and versus in the private sector. One of the things that really stands out to me is that in the private sector, when each individual client has their own unique needs and how to prepare their case, we can customize the resources to attack that particular problem for that particular client, right? And so we can have 5 people working on it. We have 10 people work on it. We can link in other attorneys to tackle a particular case. That type of creative and method of dealing with individual problems, in my experience of working with nonprofit, it's not there, right? So the clients come in and they need to do something, and you assist them and you process it, but it's very, very standard, and there's a formula to it. And I think in my experience, you do your best, but it's still very much limited to that. Now, the con of what we do, and this is something like I think about a lot, is when we select clients, when we work with different clients, a lot of times in nonprofit, you almost help everybody that comes through the door, with some exceptions. And you're able to learn and rejoice, and it's really fun and exciting. But here, generally speaking, you select the different clients, and so the work you do is much more, the same. And so being able to expose that, I think, and obviously this is not true for every single firm and for every single nonprofit, but I think generally speaking, I think that is some of the pro and con that I've seen. And that's my opinion. And I'll have Katie share next, and then Vicky.
Yeah, so I think some of the pros and cons that I've experienced between my work, and when I was with a private firm, it was a quite small firm. There were just a handful of attorneys. So actually the nonprofit that I'm at is actually quite larger than the firm I was at before. But I do think some of the pros more recently in the nonprofit sector is an increased focus on self-care, addressing traumas that immigration attorneys experience by working with clients. So that's really something that's been sort of developing maybe over the past couple of years. It's just bringing this awareness, and that can be very helpful given some of the really intense cases that we can take on. And it's a very supportive network. And there's a lot of collaboration between organizations. I think another pro can be sometimes flexibility in your type of work schedule or the work setting. It depends, of course, on each office, but there can be some flexibility in maybe the hours you want to work or where you want to work. But I would say that some of the cons are that I didn't necessarily know of before entering this type of work. It was depending on your role, the type or the time that is dedicated to the organization structure, and if you have funding requirements. The amount of time that it takes to sort of sort that out, the business end of being in a nonprofit can take up some of your time. And as well, going off of funding, sometimes you have funding restrictions, and even though you want to take on a case very, very strongly, you feel very much for a client, sometimes funding restrictions just don't allow you, and your hands are sort of tied, and you don't have that flexibility in deciding the types of cases you take on.
So for me, I would say the pros of being in private practice would be working with clients that are leaders in their field or doing very innovative things. And sometimes they're in the news for what they do, which I think is really interesting. And especially during the last year with the pandemic and how that impacted businesses, trying to come up with different solutions. Sometimes you're getting a little creative to help them keep their businesses running and keep them employing people who, ultimately supporting the economy that way. I think that was really interesting and unexpected for everyone. A con, this is not specific to my job, I would say, but it can be pretty stressful sometimes. We have deadlines that we're meeting all the time. Sometimes there's a lot riding on a particular case. It's impacting someone's whole life. Sometimes they're very senior or prominent people in the community. So, just making sure that nothing goes wrong. And for, the other thing I guess would be being in the private sector, you can't take on any client, right? They have to retain you. And what I liked about being in the nonprofit or government was that you could really help anybody who met whatever, eligibility. So if they're a constituent of your state or whatever. And it was a lot of times, people that couldn't afford an attorney or really didn't know where else to turn. So it was a good feeling to be able to help them.